Content warning. This episode covers the murders of a mother and son, graphic descriptions of gunshot wounds, domestic and family violence, addiction, financial exploitation of vulnerable and disabled victims, and the death of a young woman in an earlier boating accident. Please take care while listening.
It's 10 on a Monday night in June, and a man is on the phone with the tow dispatcher, and he cannot get the words out right. I've been up here with them. They're not moving, he says. His voice is shaking. He tells the dispatcher his wife and son are on the ground at the dog kennels behind their house and that there's a lot of blood. He says he needs to check if they're breathing. He hangs up and calls back less than a minute later, screaming. The property is called Moselle, 1,700 acres of hunting land in the South Carolina Lowcountry, the kind of place a family builds when that family has run the local legal system for nearly a century. The man on the phone is Alec Murdaugh, attorney, fourth generation in a family dynasty of prosecutors. And for the next several hours, the grieving husband and father who says he found his wife and son shot to death steps from their own back door. Hey everyone, welcome back to Coffee and Crime with Mom. I'm Zalle.
And I'm Nicholle. And Zalle, this is a big one. This is a two-parter because there is genuinely no way to tell this story in one episode and do it any justice. This case has murders. It has millions of stolen dollars. It has a 100-year-old family dynasty. And this is the part that's almost hard to believe. It is still not over, not even close.
And I'm Jay Zalee's husband. This case has been living in our house for months while we've researched it. And I'm here with you on this one because we're talking about a family, not just a docket number.
That's exactly right. Today in part one, we're covering the case most people think they already know. The murders of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh and the trial that convicted their husband and father. Next episode, part two, we cover everything that's happened since. Because in 2026, this case blew back open in a way nobody saw coming. But we have to start at the beginning, so let's set the scene.
The Lowcountry of South Carolina, Hampton, Colleton, Beaufort, the swampy moss-draped counties along the coast has been run in one very specific scene by one family for 106 years, starting with Alec Murdaugh's great-grandfather. The Murdaughs held the elected office of solicitor, the top prosecutor, for the entire 14th Judicial Circuit, uninterrupted from 1920 until 2006. 3 generations of Murdaugh men decided who got charged with what in that part of the state. Alec Murdaugh didn't inherit that office, but he inherited everything that came with the name. A law firm his family had built, pt.1, and a level of trust and deference in the local community that most attorneys never get in a lifetime. By 2021, Alec Murdaugh was a personal injury lawyer at that firm, married to Margaret Maggie Murdaugh, with 2 sons, Buster, the older son, and Paul, 22 years old, a hunting and fishing enthusiast who was, at that exact moment, facing serious legal trouble of his own, criminal charges tied to a boat crash 2 years earlier that had killed a young woman named Mallory Beach.
We're going to come back to that boat crash in detail because it matters enormously to the story. It's practically the engine underneath everything else that happens. The family bought Moselle around 2012, roughly 1,700 acres out in Islington in Colleton County, about 20 minutes from where they lived before in Hampton. It had dog kennels, a feed room, acres of hunting trails, the kind of property people used as a status symbol as much as a home. On the night of June 7, 2021, Maggie and Paul were shot to death right there near those kennels. Alec told police he'd been up at the main house, then driven down to check on his elderly mother, and that he found the bodies when he came back. No weapon recovered at the scene. No witnesses, no obvious motives at first.
And that's the part of why this grabs so many people. You have a family that's been in the justice system for generations, and suddenly the justice system turns around and points right back at them.
So let's start where this story actually begins. Not with the murders, but with everything underneath them that the public didn't know yet.
Let's actually walk through February 23rd and 24th, 2019, hour by hour, because the details matter more than most people realize. Around 5:30 in the evening, Paul Murdaugh, 19 at the time, used his older brother Buster's ID to buy alcohol at a Parker's gas station in Ridgeland, White Claw, Natural Light, Michelob Ultra. He wasn't old enough to buy it himself. The group met up at the Murdaugh family's river house on the Chechessie Creek, a home worth over $1 million that belonged to Alex's father. 6 of them, all young adults, Paul and his girlfriend, Morgan Doty, cousins Connor and Anthony Cook with their girlfriends, Miley Altman and Mallory Beach. They took a 17-foot sea hunt boat registered to Alec with no working navigation lights out to an oyster roast on an island near Beaufort. They stayed roughly 5 hours.
So just sit with that combination for a second. Underage drinking, no navigation lights, a powerful family name, and a boat that's treated like it's untouchable because of who owns it.
None of that should have happened whatsoever. They shouldn't have been allowed to take the boat. And he definitely
They shouldn't have.
been buying
Absolutely.
liquor.
It seems like they kind of did whatever they wanted to do. They had the run of this town.
Yeah. Around 1 a.m, surveillance video would later show Paul and Connor doing shots at a bar called Luther's Rare and Well Done. And witnesses said Paul's behavior on the way back was already alarming before the crash even happened. He was driving erratically, doing what people described as donuts with the boat. And when his girlfriend and others asked him to slow down or let someone else drive, he shoved her, spat on her, and then slapped her. "This is my boat," he told them. "I'll be damned if anyone else drives it." At 2:17 in the morning, the boat slammed into a piling under the bridge at Archer's Creek near Paris Island. Mallory Beach was thrown into the water. The other 4 passengers were hurt. Paul's blood alcohol content was later measured at roughly 3 times the legal limit.
Mallory Beach's body wasn't found for 7 days. She was recovered March 3rd, 2019, in a marsh about 5 miles from the crash site. Cause of death, drowning, combined with blunt force trauma from being thrown out of the boat. Paul was charged with 3 felony counts, including boating under the influence causing death, and almost immediately there were accusations from Mallory's family, from the public, that the Murdaugh name was being used to make the case disappear. There were claims the family used its influence with the local sheriff's office to control the narrative. Alec denied all of it, but the case never went to trial because 2 years later, Paul was murdered before it could.
And underneath that microscope, something else was already rotting. Because as it would later come out, Alec Murdaugh had been stealing from his own clients quietly for years. And the pressure of the boat crash lawsuit, the depositions, the discovery, all of it was starting to close in on a financial house of cards that had been standing since at least 2011. One of the people he'd already stolen from was a woman who worked in his own home for over 2 decades. Her name was Gloria Satterfield.
Gloria Satterfield had worked as the Murdaugh family's housekeeper for more than 20 years. On the morning of February 2nd, 2018, around 9:24 a.m., she fell down the brick front steps at the Murdaugh home. 8 steps, steep, no railing to speak of. Maggie called 911. Paul, who was home at the time, got on the phone with the dispatcher too. Gloria was bleeding from her head, and at some point, accounts differ on exactly when, she appears to have fallen a second time.
The family's story for years was that the Murdaugh's own dogs had tripped her on the steps. 4 dogs by the name of Bubba, Bourbon, Blue, and Sassy. That detail mattered enormously because it's what let Alex tell Gloria's son this was something they could sue over. The family's homeowner insurance, specifically since a pet-related injury on the property was exactly the kind of claim that policy was designed to cover. Gloria never fully recovered. She died 3.5 weeks later on February 26, 2018 from complications of the traumatic brain injury. A stroke followed by cardiac arrest. Jesus, she went through a lot.
Yeah.
And here's a detail that still doesn't sit right with anyone who looks at it closely. Her death certificate listed the manner of death as natural, not an accident, not a fall, natural. No autopsies was performed. It was never even reported to the county coroner at the time it should have been. Investigators would only get real answers years later after her body was exhumed. The reason why the death certificate says that it's natural cause of death is because the brain injury is not what actually killed her. It was the cardiac arrest, the stroke, all of that is what actually killed her, which is natural causes.
Okay.
There's a similar case to that. what's the name? C. Murders case. His case is similar to that.
Yeah, I don't know. That's weird.
Alec was the one who suggested her son sue. He told them it was the only way to get help with her final medical bills, and he referred them to his close friend and fellow attorney, Corey Fleming, to handle it, conveniently keeping the case inside his own circle instead of sending it to an outside lawyer with no stake in how quietly it got resolved. The claim settled for roughly $4.3 million, paid out in 2 installments, $505,000 and then $3.8 million. Gloria Satterfield's son never saw a cent of either payment. And here's the detail that, once you know it, makes the whole "the dogs did it" story fall apart completely. Years later, in a court filing, Alec Murdaugh himself admitted under oath that no dogs were involved at all. He said he'd invented the critical facts of how she fell specifically to make the insurance claim bigger.
He is a piece of shit.
He is.
Yeah, so let that sit for a second. He didn't just steal the settlement. He appears to have shaped the underlying story of how a woman in his own home died. 20 years of loyalty to his family in order to make sure there was a bigger check to steal from her sons. That money went instead into a fake company account.
On a human level, that's the part that hits me the hardest. You're not just taking money, you're rewriting the story of how someone's mom died. And then cashing that rewrite like a check is crazy.
That company was called Forge. Alec created it in September of 2015, years before Gloria's death, which tells you this wasn't improvised. It was an infrastructure he'd already built and was just waiting to use. He named it deliberately close to a real legitimate business, Forge Consulting, a well-known structured settlement brokerage that insurance companies and law firms use all the time. The account was literally titled Richard A. Murdaugh, Sole Proprietor, DBA Forge. His own legal name, Richard Alexander Murdaugh, doing business as something that sounded exactly like a company a bank employee or a law partner glancing at a wire transfer would assume was legitimate and never think twice about. And that's true. Federal prosecutors would later say this scheme, on top of a separate arrangement with the banker named Russell Lafitte, who helped him divert other clients' settlement checks through Palmetto State Bank, had been running since at least 2011, a full decade before the murders.
Okay, we have to slow down here because he stole from clients is a sentence everyone knows about this case. And it does not even begin to capture who those clients actually were. So let's name names because those people deserve to be more than a footnote in somebody else's true crime story. Start with Hakeem Pickney. Hakeem was deaf since childhood, an aspiring football player. 19 years old in 2009 when he was in a car crash on I-95 in Hampton County caused by a defective tire. The crash left him quadriplegic. Alex Murdaugh represented him in a lawsuit against the tire manufacturer. Hakeem died in 2011 at around 21 years old after his ventilator was unplugged at a nursing facility. First of all, what?
We need more on that story. The hell?
What?
It happens a lot more than you think.
But somebody needed a charger?
Blood
Plug for the
people?
charger or something?
No, they kick it, it comes unplugged. It's a whole thing. You'll know. You're going to nursing school. You'll figure it out.
I'll figure it out. Okay.
That's crazy.
Instead of that settlement money going where it should have, to Hakeem's care, and after his death to his family, Alec Murdaugh and banker Russell Lafitte, who was serving as the court-appointed conservator of the funds, stole from it. Investigators traced one check alone from December 2011 for over $300,000 that got turned into money orders Alec used to cover his own personal debts. Total estimates for what was taken from the Pickney settlement funds run close to $1 million. And it doesn't stop with Hakeem. His cousin, Natasha Thompson, was injured in that same 2009 crash. Lafitte held over $350,000 in trust for her, and prosecutors said he and Alec surreptitiously misappropriated those funds too. Hakeem's own mother, Pamela Pickney, was also hurt in the crash and was separately defrauded by Alec and his friend Corey Fleming between 2012 and 2017. Some of that stolen money is believed to have paid for chartered private flights so Alec, Fleming, and another attorney could go watch the College World Series in Omaha in 2012.
Wow.
This man is just corrupt to the core.
Bags. Yes. As somebody who has money, I don't understand all of that.
Yeah, because he
Clearly,
was
didn't
spending
have
more
the
than
money.
even he had. That's what's ridiculous.
Right. That's why, clearly. But then there's Arthur Badger, a man from Allendale County, whose wife was killed in the 2011 crash. Alex stole $1,325,000 from him across 14 separate thefts between February 2013 and June 2014. 14. That's not one bad decision. That's a routine. And he's an asshole.
He is. All of them are.
And if you ever had to fight with an insurance company over a bill, you know how long those checks take to show up. So then have a lawyer on your side quietly reroute them. That's a different level of betrayal to me.
Definitely. Londell Gray's family lost her in a 2012 ambulance crash and never saw the more than $112,000 they were owed. Two sisters, Hannah Plyler and Elena Spahn, were injured as children in a 2005 rollover crash that killed their mother and their brother. Russell Lafitte was the conservator on their settlement money too, and it was diverted the same way. Added up, and depending on which point in the investigation you're looking at, prosecutors described the state's charges alone climbing from $6.2 million to $8.4 to over $9 million. Combine the state and federal cases across roughly 15 years and 27 identified victims, and the number the courts ultimately used was over $20 million from the dead, from the disabled, from grieving families, and, as we already covered, from the woman who cleaned his own house.
Yeah, they're both a piece of shit.
Mm-hmm.
So by spring of 2021, here's where things stood. Alec Murdaugh's own law partners were starting to notice financial irregularities inside the firm. The boat crash lawsuit was grinding forward with depositions that threatened to expose the Satterfield scheme specifically. And on June 7, 2021, the same day his partners would later say they confronted him about missing money, his wife and son were shot to death.
Let's go back to that 911 call because the full 7 minutes tell you almost everything about this case unfolded from that point forward. Alec called Hampton County 911 at 10:07 p.m. on June 7, 2021. The call got transferred to Colleton County since that's where Moselle actually sits. The whole call runs 637 seconds, over 10 minutes on the phone with dispatch. He tells them Maggie is shot in the head, that Paul is shot really bad, and at one point he says, "Ma'am, I don't know, but he has blood everywhere. I can see his brain. He's crying, gasping." He describes trying to turn Maggie over and finding a hole in her head. He tells them nobody else was supposed to be at the house that night. And then, almost as an afterthought, in the middle of all that panic, he mentions that Paul had been getting threats for months and months over the boat crash, and that he's going to go back to the house and get a shotgun, just in case whoever made those threats is still out there.
If you listen to a lot of emergency calls, you start to notice not just what people say, but when they say it. The fact that he brings in the boat crash threats in the middle of describing the bodies tells you where his mind is already going. First responders didn't get there until roughly 10:25, almost 8 minutes after the call started. The first deputy on scene, an officer named Green, would later testify that Alex was upset, but he never actually saw him cry.
And that's weird, ain't it? Because if you see your son's brains all over the place and your wife is shot, I'm assuming there's going to be some tears. He made noises like he was crying. If y'all watch the body cam footage, he acted like he was sobbing, but it was never a tear.
And I think that's what makes it worse. To me, it's not that he didn't cry, because I think people react to things differently. It's that he was trying to cry. So it makes it look like he's trying to show that emotion instead of, some people, that's not their reaction. We had this conversation before. But the fact that he's trying to cover it up shows that that's what he thinks he's supposed to be doing. So he's trying to make it look that way.
I agree. Okay, here's what investigators walked into. Time of death was estimated somewhere between 8:50 and 9 p.m., meaning Maggie and Paul had already been dead for well over an hour before Alec placed that call. Paul had been shot twice with a shotgun, once in the chest, once in the head, and crime scene analysts would testify he was standing about 5 feet inside the family's feed room, a space roughly 10 feet deep and 6 feet wide, when the first shot to his chest hit him. Maggie had been shot 5 times with a .300 blackout round from an AR-style rifle, 2 of those hits to the head. Their bodies were found about 12 feet apart, and Maggie was shot when she was running to Paul. She heard the shots from where Paul was and was running to him. and that's when she was shot.
No weapon was ever recovered at the scene. No shell casings were found near Paul's body, even though a shotgun had clearly been used on him, which investigators would spend years trying to explain. Roger Dale Davis, the property's dog kennel caretaker, was among the first people connected to the family to be near the scene that night. For months after, no arrests were made. Then, on September 4th, 2021, 3 months after the murders, Alec Murdaugh was shot in the head on the side of a rural road in what he initially told police was a drive-by shooting by a stranger. He later admitted the truth. He'd arranged for a distant cousin, Curtis Edward Cousinetti Smith, to shoot him so his surviving son, Buster, could collect a $10 million life insurance payout. Alec has since said he wanted his family to have money after his death because he knew the financial crimes were about to be exposed and he'd be disgraced either way. Smith would later resurface in interviews claiming Alec had actually asked him to kill him outright, not just wound him, a claim that's never been independently collaborated and one we'll get into more in part 2.
That insurance fraud suicide plot fell apart almost immediately, and it triggered an avalanche. Alec checked into a rehab for an opioid addiction he said he'd been hiding for 20 years. His own law firm publicly announced they discovered he'd been stealing money and demanded his resignation. And in South Carolina's top prosecutors, a specifically appointed team led by attorney Crichton Waters started building not one case against Alec Murdaugh, but 2: financial crimes and murder. Before we get to the rest, we want to spend a minute on something that almost never gets covered in the headline version of this case. What that crime scene actually looked like in the hours after the murders and who was allowed to move through it. State law enforcement released Moselle back to the family the very next morning, not days later, the morning after. Multiple vehicles and people were allowed onto the property in those first hours, including Murdaugh relatives and family friends. On a night with misting rain, Maggie and Paul's bodies were covered with sheets, not tarps. Mark Ball, Alec's law partner and close friend of 34 years, arrived around 10:52 that night and testified there was nothing keeping cars away. People just kept piling in, he said. That first responders were literally walking through the taped-off area, including the space between the two bodies, and that he watched water dripping off the kennel roof onto Paul's body as a light rain started to fall. It's a crime scene. You don't want water dripping all over the place, he testified. But most importantly, I thought it was pretty disrespectful. Paul was a good young man. His group was eventually sent inside the main house instead of away from the property entirely, and some of them, by his own account, tidied up the kitchen while they waited. When Ball went back out to the kennels the next day, after SLED had supposedly finished collecting evidence, he found a baseball-sized fragment of Paul's skull sitting still on the concrete, evidence nobody had bothered to recover. All of that is horrible.
I don't even know what to say.
Yeah, speechless.
You know how close range you have to be to knock off a baseball-sized fragment of somebody's skull? They basically have to be staring down the barrel at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the theories they were saying when they were talking about it was that Alec walked into the feed room and shot Paul the first time in the chest, and Paul started walking towards the door, and Alec had already walked out. He was going towards where Maggie was when he realized Paul hadn't fallen on the ground yet and was walking out of the barn. He was down on the floor switching weapons, and so he just picked the shotgun back up and shot him as he started falling forward.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how he got the whole brain thing. So I do think that that's what happened, because he had to get down to switch the weapon so he could shoot Maggie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
well, Maggie
he definitely was
shot from a distance, though.
She was with that 300 blackout rifle. She wasn't on Paul.
Well, I'm saying, though, but he had to been gone and moved basically back towards the main house to shoot her.
Well, she was coming from across
because
the barn.
She was coming
she was moving from another part of the barn. She started running when she heard the gunshot.
She ran.
So she's coming from like the other side. So she wasn't near him. Like the tack room is where everything happened to Paul. So he basically turned around. Maggie was coming and he shot her. So she's still a distance off.
He shot her as she was turning the corner.
I thought she was next to Paul when she died.
No. He shot her as she was turning the corner to come to where Paul was at.
And here's the detail that made Ball's testimony matter so much more than a complaint about sloppy police work. He was actually called by the defense to argue the crime scene had been mishandled. But under cross-examination, he told the jury he was certain the voice on that Snapchat video from the Kennels, recorded at 8:44 p.m., minutes before the shooting was Alex. He said Alec had told him personally at least 3 times in the days afterward that he'd never gone down to the kennels that night at all, that he'd napped after dinner and only went down later to find the bodies. Ball said that was a lie and said it changed everything he knew about his friend of 34 years.
And that's the pattern you're going to see again and again. People who've known him for decades having to say, I believe him. And then this case forced me to admit he was lying.
Yeah, because here's the thing. He said that they had dinner or whatever. They had dinner together and that Maggie said that they were going to go down to the kennels and feed the dogs or whatever. And he told her, okay, I'm going to go check on mom. And so he said that he left after that. I didn't hear anything about a nap. I heard he left and supposedly that's when he went to his mom's to go check on his mom's and never went down to the kennel. When he came back, he went down there and that's when he found the bodies. But that's not what happened. Right. Clearly, because the Snapchat, for one, he didn't know that Paul was recording the video. So that got him too. But then his mom had a lady who was an in-house caretaker. So she told everybody that the times he's saying none of that shit added up neither. Like he was not here when he said he was here.
Right. And she also talked about their relationship, hers and Alex's relationship, and the oddities in that relationship. You know, they weren't really getting along because of his use of his addiction to the pain pills and stuff like that. And Alex's younger brother, John Marvin Murdaugh, went out to the property the next morning, June 8th, after getting permission through a law enforcement contact, Captain Ryan Neal. The scene had not been cleaned. He found what remained of Paul's body near the feed room, bits of his own nephew still there in the opening. Under oath, fighting through tears, John Marvin told the jury, I saw blood. I saw brains. I saw pieces of skull. It was terrible. He said he started cleaning it up himself because it felt like the right thing to do, like he owed it, like he owed Paul that much. His exact words, no mother, aunt, or uncle should ever have to witness and endure what I did that day. He told the jury he spoke to Paul out loud while he was out there, told him he loved him, and promised he'd find whoever did this. When a prosecutor asked him directly if he had ever identified who that was, John Marvin said simply, I have not.
Well, the crazy part about that is that, you know, in situations like this where it's like a gruesome murder, the state offers to clean your property or whatever, wherever the murder takes place, and they denied it. The Murdaughs were like, no, we got it. We'll clean it ourselves.
That's weird.
So it wasn't like the police, you know, fumbled and just left shit there, which they might have left like the fragment of the skull or whatever else.
Yeah, they definitely left some stuff
They
there.
left something, but it wasn't just like, yeah, we're just not going to do anything about it. The Murdaughs denied having them clean up the murder scene. And the house itself, the actual home Alec, Maggie, and Paul had lived in, was handed over to the family's long-term housekeeper the very next morning too, with an unusual request. Her name is Blanca Terubiat Simpson. She worked for the Murdaughs for well over a decade by that point, going back to 2007, and she wasn't just a staff. She was genuinely close to Maggie, someone Maggie pulled into a room and cried in front of when she was scared about money. On the evening of June 7th, before any of this happened, Maggie had texted Blanca to come cook dinner at Moselle's because Alec wanted her and Paul to come home from their beach house at Edisto. Blanca said Maggie sounded almost reluctant. She liked being at Edisto. There was renovation work going on there she wanted to keep an eye on. Blanca made cube steak, white rice, green beans, and gravy, left it on the stove, and texted Maggie to let her know. That was the last contact she had with her before the murders.
The next morning, Alec called her. She testified he sounded shaky. B, they're gone, he told her. They're gone. She didn't understand what he meant and asked him to explain. No, B, he said, they're dead. He asked her to come to the house and clean, to make it look, in his words, the way Maggie would like it, because people were going to start stopping by.
Is that not weird?
Weird.
Is that not weird?
Like, that's what you would be thinking about after your wife and your son were murdered.
Immediately after.
Yeah, that's crazy. When she got there, she said it felt cold, wrong, the second she unlocked the front door. The food she cooked the night before was put in the refrigerator in the pots instead of left out on the sink the way the family always did for her. Maggie's pajamas and a pair of underwear Blanca said Maggie never actually wore to bed were neatly in the middle of the doorway. In the primary bathroom, she found a small puddle of water by the shower, a towel on the floor, and a pair of khaki pants she recognized Alec having worn that morning. In the closet, a second damp towel on the floor. She washed all of it. Nobody stopped her. No one told her to leave anything in place, even though law enforcement agents came in and out of the house while she was standing right there.
That makes me so mad. But there's one more detail from Blanca that's genuinely chilling in hindsight. Alec had been wearing a specific seafoam green polo shirt that morning. She remembered it clearly because she'd actually fixed his collar for him before he left. Blanca testified she never saw that shirt again after that day. Months later, she said Alec brought it up out of nowhere, told her, "Hey, I was wearing that shirt that day," as though he were trying to get her to agree to a version of the event she didn't actually remember. She didn't correct him out loud, but she remembered exactly which shirt he'd worn because she was the one who fixed the collar.
A little over a week after the murders, while she was cleaning out Maggie's car, which had been towed to the sheriff's impound lot, Blanca found one of Maggie's wedding rings wedged under the driver's seat. And separately, months later, in September of 2021, when investigators executed a search warrant at Alec's parents' home in Alameda, a crime scene agent found a blue tarp-like raincoat on the third floor. Prosecutors said the inside of that coat tested positive for gunshot residue, though they were never able to directly tie it to the night of the murders in a way that held up cleanly at trial.
Crazy.
Phone records paint the rest of that night in strange. Clip little pieces around 10:36. Alec called his cousin Randy Murdaugh 56 seconds. At 10:46, Buster tried calling Maggie's phone. No answer because then she'd already been dead for well over an hour. A minute later, at 10:47, Alec texted Buster and two family members, Tracy White and two family friends, Tracy White and Brooklyn White. "Call me urgent." Buster called Alec back that same minute, a conversation that ran nearly 3 minutes. At 11:19, Randy, using Alec's phone, texted a family friend named Bart Proctor. "Bart, this is Randy. There has been a terrible tragedy. Buster's girlfriend, Brooklyn White, and Alec's sister, Lynn Murdaugh, will go on to sit through nearly every day of the trial alongside Buster."
Blanca's role in this story didn't end with the trial either. She spent 3 hours on the stand testifying about all of it. The collar, the shirt, the pants, the pajamas, and none of that testimony was ever seriously challenged or discredited. Years later, watching old body camera footage after the trial had already ended, she noticed a beach towel sitting on the front seat of Alec's car, a towel she recognized as one she personally washed, dried, and folded, and placed on a high shelf in the laundry room that same day. "I looked at that towel," she said since, "and I said, oh my God, he did it." She's come to believe he may have rinsed off near the Kennels afterward, either changing there or back at the house, and that the towel and that missing seafoam shirt were both part of cleaning up evidence that has never resurfaced.
And it's worth saying out loud, if Blanca hadn't remembered those tiny domestic details, the collar, the towel, the way the food was usually left, a big piece of the state's story never would have existed. The person you think is just the housekeeper ends up being one who's actually watching the house.
She also said something else that stuck with a lot of people who followed this case closely. That when she tried to tell investigators what she noticed in those early days, nobody really asked her much of anything. In her words, to her, it felt like she was written off as just a housekeeper. A woman who spent close to 2 decades inside that family's home, who fixed Alec's collar the morning his wife and son died, who told to make the crime scene look presentable, and whose observations, the ones that would later matter enormously to the state's case, almost went unheard entirely.
That's ridiculous.
That's insane.
Alec,
Why would you not
Alec,
listen to the person that's
who,
closest to
who
them
is in the house. She sees
Yeah.
them when their guards are down.
every day?
Alec Murdaugh was arrested on financial crime charges first in October of 2021. Theft, forgery, breach of trust, tied specifically to the $4.3 million scheme against the the Satterford estate. Those charges would multiply over the following year into more than 90 separate counts across 6 counties, as investigators kept finding more victims and more stolen money. Then, on July 14, 2022, 13 months after the murders, a grand jury indicted him for the killings of Maggie and Paul. The state's theory, laid out by prosecutor Crichton Waters, was motive. Alec Murdaugh's financial crimes were about to be exposed. His life as he knew it was about to end, and he killed his wife and son rather than facing that reckoning. Or, in another version of the theory Waters offered, to buy himself sympathy and delay as the financial house of cards collapsed around him.
Alec Murdaugh has always denied killing Maggie and Paul. He has never denied stealing the money. That split confessed thief, denied murderer is the exact tension this case has been sitting in for 5 years. And it's the tension that's about to explode again in part 2. But first, let's talk about the trial that made this a national story. The murder trial opened in January 2023 in the Colleton County Courthouse in Walterboro, South Carolina, the same courthouse Alec Murdaugh's family had presided over for generations. It ran 6 weeks, and actually, they had a picture of his grandfather hanging up in the actual courtroom that the judge made them take down.
Good for that judge.
Yes. Prosecutors leaned heavily on cell phone data in that Snapchat video Paul had taken at the dog kennels just minutes before the murders, a video that captured Alec's voice in the background directly contradicting his claim that he had never been down there that evening. The jury was even taken out to the actual property in late February to walk around the ground itself over the defense's objection that the vegetation had changed since 2021. The defense argued there was no direct physical evidence tying Alex to the murder. No gun ever recovered, no gunshot residue on him, no blood on his clothes, despite the volume of blood at the scene. They argued the real killers were never properly investigated. Floating theories involved people connected to the boat crash case or to Alec's stolen money victims.
And then Alec Murdaugh did something his own attorneys initially advised against. He testified. For 2 full days, he sat on the stand and admitted under oath to the financial crimes, the stealing, the lying to his partners, the opioid addiction. He said admitting to being a goddamn liar about the money was easier than continuing to deny it, and that doing so would actually make the jury trust him more about the murders. He denied repeatedly and emotionally killing his wife and son. As a husband and as a dad, that is the part where I keep asking myself, if you'll admit to being a liar about everything that keeps the lights on, but insist you're telling the truth about the night your family died, where do you personally draw that line?
On March 2nd, 2003, after roughly 3 hours of deliberation, the jury convicted Alec Murdaugh on 2 counts of murder and 2 related weapons counts. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. For most people who followed this case, that was the ending. Convicted, sentenced, case closed. Alec Murdaugh went on over the following year to also plead guilty to dozens of state and federal financial crimes charges, stealing more than $20 million combined from clients, friends, and his own law firm over roughly 14 years, and received an additional 27 years on the state charges and 40 years federally, both running alongside his life sentences, which good for them for convicting him, but for getting him on the financial crimes first. Because either way, your ass is going to jail.
Right. And that should have been the end of it. A man who stole from a disabled quadriplegic client, from a grieving housekeeper's family, from an injured state trooper, convicted of murdering his own wife and son, locked away for the rest of his life several times over, except in May of 2026. 3 years after that jury came back in 3 hours, the South Carolina Supreme Court did something almost nobody expected. They threw the murder convictions out.
Which means whether you think he did it or not, we're all about to watch the justice system try to do this again, this time under a microscope. And that, co-conspirators, is exactly where we're going to pick that story back up. Because it turns out the person who tampered with that jury wasn't a stranger, wasn't a hired gun, wasn't anyone connected to the Murdaugh family's enemies. It was the county's own clerk of court, someone whose job it was to protect that trial's integrity. Next episode, we'll go over how Becky Hill unraveled a murder conviction 3 years after it was handed down. What happened to a stolen fortune of over $20 million when the man who stole it is already in prison for something else entirely, and where this case genuinely actively stands right now in the summer of 2026. Okay, and so before we end this episode, I need to know how you feel about this so I can tell you how I feel about this.
Okay. So I don't know how it could be anything but this man killed his wife and son. It's for me, I can only speak for me, and I'm not on the jury, but the fact that we can hear him on that Snapchat video that Paul wasn't even trying to catch anybody on. He was just taking the video of his friend's dog that he was keeping while his friend was traveling. So you hear Alec speaking on that recording. So yes, you were lying. After that, I don't need to know anything else. You lied to even being there. And clearly, if you were there at that point and then they're dead when you come back, you were there.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And it which gives me the chills is the actual, like, the audio on the Snapchat. Everybody's acting normal. None of them know what's happening. And then literally minutes later, they're both dead.
Right. How cold-blooded you have to be not only to kill your wife and son, but to stand there and act like everything's okay and then kill them.
And then the fact that right after this, if what the whole towel being in the car part was true from Blanca, then you did go down there and you changed. And the fact that you said you tried to check Paul and turn him over was what you said, and you ended up touching his body. There should have been blood on you. You said you touched Maggie to turn her over and you saw a hole in her head. There should have been blood on you. The fact that there was nothing on you tells me you cleaned up. That in itself tells me the way you acted at the crime scene, you didn't cry. You acted like you were crying, but it was never a tear. And then when it was time for you to tell them what was happening, you made it through the story for the most part without like real tears or really crying from what we can see, what we are shown. It doesn't add up. It doesn't add up. You lied about that. Your mother's nurse who was there, who lived with her, who was taking care of her, she already was like, yeah, no, he came in, he was fidgety. He wasn't here at the time he said he was here. His mom was asleep, so he didn't even get to talk to her. He just sat and watched TV with me for a little bit and then went home. Like, all of that is weird. It's just a whole bunch of weirdness happening. So it's no way you didn't do this shit.
And I'm just amazed that somebody whose whole family, his father, his grandfather, all these people are prosecutors, people who prosecute these types of crimes, and you didn't figure out how to do this any better than you did. It's crazy.
Right. And then you trying to use 2 guns so that way you can be like, oh, it had to have been multiple people. And we said earlier, the fact that he randomly started mentioning, oh, my son was getting threats because of this crash, it had to have been something to do with that. Like, he just, it doesn't add up. It doesn't add up.
No, it doesn't. No. I don't think there's a way around that. But thank you all so much for being here with us for part 1 of this case, Co-Conspirators. Come back for part 2. You're going to want to hear how this one keeps going.
Yeah, so make sure that you leave us a review and tell us what you think about this case. If you can't leave a review, leave a comment. You know, we post on all the socials and we read everything. And until next time, keep it real, Co-Conspirators.
Bye.